Another interesting example of natural selection refers to sexual selection, and that refers to choosing a mate. And for example, in birds, females have to be camouflated or well camouflated because they are usually the ones that sit on the eggs, so they shouldn't be very well visible. While males, as in these bird of paradise birds, are very flashy and gorgeous, and because their adaptation there is to perform for being selected as the mate. So it's very important for them to be very visible, sometimes to the predators as well, but in this case, they are very important to be very visible to potential mates. Another interesting example is from these flies that in which males that have very elongated eyes are selected for by females. So in general, one version of a trait versus another has a particular advantage in attracting more mates, which would lead to further selecting for that particular traits, because that particular individual will leave more offsprings. And because of that will lead to sexual dimorphism. So in this case, within the population, there is a tug of war. So females have to be more camouflated in the birds, for example. And by the way, you might want to view those very cool videos. While the males will be selected for more and more flashy and beautiful looking and better dances and better songs and so on. So leading to another type of dimorphism, in this case sexual dimorphism, in which in the same population the two genders, so males versus females, are very different looking from each other. One of the most interesting ones maybe, or just shocking if you wish, it's a species of monkeys that in which one, so males are one color, brown, let's say, and the other one are black. And speak about flashy, this is obviously a peacock, so not to be confused with a peahen. So it's the male of the species of peacocks from Asia. So they're birds that have adapted to have extremely large feathers in their tail. And the adaptation here is when this particular bird, so this peacock, similar to American turkeys if you want, are displaying their feather tails. These dots are very similar to eyes, and they are mesmerizing the mate, the peahens, that would be more attracted to a male that has more of these mesmerizing eyes. There is an interesting balance in between how showy and flashy can you allow yourself to be versus how not so showy and flashy can you allow to be, because obviously the longer the tail, the bigger the tail, more eyes, more chances for breeding, but in the same time more chances to being chased or caught in the chase by a predator. So there is a tough balance in between how much of this detrimental effect of this otherwise a positive adaptive trait. And speak about that tug of war, one interesting concept of evolution, it's balanced polymorphism, which means that two alternative traits could be favored for within a population. So even though one of them could give a negative, could be seen negatively or selected out by a natural selection, in the same time, according to your habitat, then it could also give an advantage. And probably one of the best examples that you read in your textbook, and definitely in your Making the Fittest later on, it's this example of sickle cell anemia versus malaria. So first of all, I want you to look up what particular point mutations causes the presence of sickle-shaped instead of round or dog bone shaped erythrocytes, red blood cells. And how is that affecting that individual's phenotype, right? So a normal red blood cell, it's shaped according to its maximum efficient transport of hemoglobin that will transport oxygen and nutrients and CO2 and so on. But if that particular erythrocyte or red blood cell is sickle-shaped, it will have a lower level of hemoglobin, so it means it will have a lower efficiency. So again, please look up what exact point mutation changed what nucleotide to what nucleotide, and because of that we call it a transition, a transversion, and then that point mutation in the genotype changed what amino acid to what other amino acid in what protein, what part of the hemoglobin of the individuals that are affected. And notice that the sickle cell shaped sickle-shaped erythrocytes can be in a state of homozygous or heterozygous, which means that you can have the affected mutated gene from one parent and then the normal gene from another parent, which means you have a combination, a co-dominance in this case. So you have a combination of the two types of red blood cells, normal shaped, which give you some level of fitness, versus abnormal shape, which give you a lower level of fitness. If you live in a habitat that has no malaria, but it turns out that in habitats where malaria also occurs, individuals that are heterozygous, so they are half normal, if you wish, or half able comparative to the other individuals, but they also have these sickle-shaped red blood cells. Even though they are not as fit in a normal habitat, so they cannot run as fast, for example, because they run out of oxygen, because they don't have the same amount of functional or fully functional red blood cells. The reason that this level of heterozygotes, so a higher level of this mutation happens to exist in areas that is also ridden with malaria, it's because those individuals have an advantage themselves too, and that advantage is that that sickle-shaped erythrocyte cannot allow for malaria, Plasmodium falciparum, so the parasite that needs to multiply itself within the red blood cell cannot do so because of the different shape. So please read again about the point mutations and how are those affecting the genotype, the phenotype, so what protein within the hemoglobin, and then what nucleotide changed from what to what, changing the amino acid from what to what, and read more about malaria. How is it possible that even though we found cures such as quinine from South America hundreds of years ago, so the fever bark tree, several different species of fever bark trees, allowed European exploration of tropical habitats that are that encounter malaria more often. So, and how is it so? And then in the same time, more farther north habitats have found ways to get rid of malaria. In fact, even the word malaria comes from Italian, and it literally means bad air, mal air, so malaria. And people that had the means would move north in summer to be less exposed to malaria, where others would live in areas that still have malaria or had more malaria, as you can see even southern Europe, in Spain and Italy and Greece and Turkey and so on. But what particular reason is it to the fact that the distribution, the higher distribution of malaria, as you can see in this map, it's overimposing with the higher distribution of sickle cell anemia. So first of all, the incidence of malaria, it's following waterways where the mosquito, the Anopheles mosquito, so it's a different genus of mosquitoes that can allow these protozoan parasites as Plasmodium, several different species, but the most common one, falciparum, to develop within their body and then transmitting that parasite through blood feeding on mammals such as humans. So first of all, they're following riverways and waterways, and they have a higher incidence in those locations where there is enough water for the mosquito to reproduce, because their larvae are aquatic. But it also correlates with this concept of balanced polymorphism, that in areas where there is more malaria, there is also a higher incidence of otherwise a deleterious heritable trait of sickle cell anemia. So lots to ponder on. How can we get rid of malaria and so many other mosquito-borne diseases? Is it ethical to just eliminate a species such as mosquitoes? Actually, there are lots of species. I just mentioned that there are several, there are at least 2 different genera, right? Culex, the common Anopheles, which is the one that carries malaria. Or do they have any other role in nature? And it turns out that actually male mosquitoes are pollinators. Would that affect life in general further? And of course, it's easy for me to say I am lucky not to have malaria or to live in an area that could allow malaria to infect. So lots to ponder on. Malaria, sickle cell anemia, and the concept of balanced polymorphism, which allows natural selection to maintain an otherwise deleterious allele within habitats where it actually gives an advantage. In this case, the parasite cannot develop well.